Hey, changemakers. Thank you for tuning into the Hacking the Patriarchy podcast. I'm your fervent feminist host, Raven O'Neill, and I get the honors of sitting down weekly with diverse experts from all walks of life to explore ideas, opportunities, and strategies that we can all use to hack our way to better lives within patriarchal societies. If you're ready to hack patriarchal systems and structures, I invite you to join us and help move the needle. I'm excited to introduce today's guest, Joey Natale. Joey is the founder of Grow Our Light, a coaching business dedicated to empowering IT professionals to build confidence, develop social skills, and foster meaningful personal and professional connections. His mission is to help individuals overcome loneliness, frustration, and stagnation, guiding them to reach their full potential and cultivate relationships that truly matter. Joey holds a Bachelor of Science in Health and Wellness and Psychology, along with certifications in health coaching, leadership, public speaking, and neuro-linguistic programming. Please join me in giving Joey the warmest welcome. Welcome, Joey. I'm excited to have you on the show today. We are here to talk about connection, and I think a great starting point for that topic, because it can be so vast, is a little bit about your background and how we landed here.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So, who am I? Where did I come from? Good question. I love to start off this story about whenever we're younger and in high school or younger, our parents and peers and teachers are like, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I'm like, "I don't know." Which is one of the worst questions you can ever ask a young person, in my personal opinion. But that's another conversation for another time, maybe. And it wasn't until I got to my senior year in high school, I walked into my first psychology class and I thought, oh, this is it. Oh yeah. I don't know what, but this is it. So then I went on to college and did psychology, health and wellness, mind and body, dual major, and then went into, was going to be a therapist, got accepted into graduate school, ended up turning it down. A fear of getting into debt and all those things. Went into IT after that, hated it so much. During the apocalypse of 2020, I attended my first Tony Robbins event, and there was a moment when he said, "You ever get this feeling where you want something more in your life, and you're just not sure what it is?" I was like, "Oh, that's me. Are you talking to me?" And he said, "If you ignore that feeling, you might wake up in 20, 30 years and be like, oh, what have I done with my life?" And I was like, "Oh, God, that sounds familiar. I've had those fears before." So I discovered this thing called coaching, and it was more like therapy, but more my style and speed. And thus I began the journey. I picked up the call, if you will, from Joseph Campbell's reference. And I've been doing it today and help many people get along their path and reach amazingness. So yeah, that's what comes to mind.
Do you find that in your work, a lot of that work leads to connection or has that underlying theme?
Absolutely. Coaching, in my personal opinion, is a relationship business. Arguably, all business is relationship based. However, a good mentor of mine said that it's better to have a mile deep and an inch wide type of relationships than a mile wide and an inch deep. Kind of think of cold calling with a mile wide and inch deep, right? It's not a matter of having as many friends as possible or knowing as many people, but having really cultivated deep connections. And in coaching, you have to really trust somebody to go to the next level, because every level there's another devil, right? So it's all about connection. If I don't have rapport and connection with somebody, they're not going to trust me. Then I got to take the leap, right? So yeah, it's all about that for sure.
For you as a coach, what does the leap mean?
It depends on the person's thing. So for me, I can only take my clients as deep as I'm willing to go or have gone in my own personal growth and journey, right? Battling my own dragons, facing my own inner work, limiting beliefs and overcoming those. But for other people, it could be like asking somebody out, or it could be like, "Hey boss, I need a raise." Or it could be getting outside their comfort zone in a social or romantic setting that they'd never done before. Or challenging old limiting beliefs that they were taught when they were younger and realizing those are outdated and untrue anymore. And I can, versus I believe for a long time that I can't or won't. Right? big leaps in many directions.
Little off topic. I want to circle back to connection and, of course, how it relates to the patriarchy. But really, one quick offshoot is what happens when you have a client that is beyond your personal experience or um, just, dare I say, like way too deep? Was that? I don't even know if that's right.
No, it makes sense. I mean, I typically have I deal with a lot of trauma work as well. I wouldn't call myself a trauma coach, but I do techniques that go deep because, as I said, every level there's another devil. And usually what holds us back is past limiting beliefs. Not always, of course, but it's our old way of thinking. So we need to update those things. I love the analogy maybe you've seen online where like this, you're going up a hill and up top of the hill is the goal, but you have this like metal or anchor of some kind attached to your leg. And those are outdated limiting beliefs. And sometimes looking at those things are painful. What you're unaware of is running your life. And sometimes you don't want to look at it, right? So going with my clients deep into the dark shadow work of themselves and being present with them, holding space for them. So going too deep, not so much. Now it's different to answer your part of the question of like out of scope, right? So addiction would be out of scope for me. Like I do not do addiction types of things. Switching habits like nail biting could be seen as addiction, but lighter, I would say, right? But it's limiting beliefs that they're open to work through that's different versus they don't want to. That's the big thing, right? They can't do your push-ups for you to do with process, right? And I'm not going to do it for you, even if I could, because that won't help you. That'll be enabling. And I'm not going to do that. So, addiction comes to mind and severe kind of like schizophrenia, like type of, when you think of psychological disorders, things that would come to mind, those kind of extreme things, because that's out of practice and scope for me. Does that make sense?
Yes, gotcha. We've gone a little off topic, but I just want to go a little more off topic, and then I
Sure.
promise we're going to circle back to the
Sure.
topic, the
Sure.
topic of the day. You mentioned that connection and you going deep. For those tuning in who want to work with a coach or someone like yourself, what are they looking for in the way of background and what you bring to the table as a coach?
Well, good question. When I'm out in the networking world and I talk to people who work day jobs and 9 to 5s, the question I always get is, ooh, where did you study that? Where did you get that certification? Which is interesting versus entrepreneurs like, how long have you been doing this? How many clients do you have? So it's experience based versus credential based. Both are very important. Let me be very clear about that. So, a younger new coach would ideally have freshly got out of a certification program. You don't want to just go to somebody who has done no studying at all, which coaching used to get a bad rap back in like, I think it was the 80s, 90s or something when it first kind of started. But like, I'm a life coach, or like, I think it was kind of the same vein of chiropractors were kind of getting crap talked by doctors back in the day as well. But that's, I don't know as much about that topic. But, what would you want to look for? You want to look for someone who has experienced mostly results. Can they help you get where you want to go? I guess a better way to answer this question is what comes to mind is there's this great book. Well, the book wasn't great, but this concept was great. I learned from it. Was there are 3 types of mentors, and mentoring and coaching and consulting are very different. We're not going to go to that topic unless you want to, but there are people who know theory. They're great. They're kind of like professors and teachers. Like they know it. They may have not done it themselves. Some have, many have actually, but they know a lot of things. They can help you get to where you're going. The second person is someone who has worked very closely with someone, kind of like imagine like a real estate person who's been really successful and their assistant has always been with them on all the flights and they just really help them out, but they haven't done it themselves. They can take you further the next direction. And then there's the third person, which is the hardest to find. Someone who's tried it, failed miserably, but then succeeded at it firsthand, right? So ideally what you want in a coach or a therapist or a consultant or a mentor is they've done it, succeeded at it. They know who you are. They've been there. I see you. I hear you. I feel you. And they make you feel those things, right? Credentials and experience are important. It's a good marker, but you need to have a conversation and wonder, do they understand me? Do they get me? Can they help me? Have they done it themselves? Right? All three of those mentors are good and they'll help you. But that's how I'd answer that question. That makes sense.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get into connecting with you at the end. Well, I'm going to circle back
Sure.
to the
Yeah.
original topic, which is connection and how women and men approach it differently and just kind of look at what we bring to the table from our past. You mentioned trauma. So trauma, societal expectations, what we kind of bring into how we lead based on those expectations and how we might be better to scrap it, change it, shift it to become better leaders.
So how they, just to make sure I'm on the same page with you, said how they go into leadership, both men and women, or how they connect, or how connection impacts leadership? I know.
Let's go with the connection, how connection impacts leadership, but how we connect based on what we're bringing with us.
Yeah, absolutely. So first thing that comes to mind is to answer that direct question is like what we've dealt with shows up in our leadership style. Right. I mean, you can answer this a number of ways, obviously. And I'm sure you probably have had guests who answer it in other ways as well. But what comes up for me is just like, I think I've already said this already, but I'm going to say it again. What you're unaware of is running your life. This is true for habits. This is true for mindset and thinking. So when you're in a leadership position, usually there's more, well, let me phrase it this way before I even finish that thought. As you take on more responsibility, family, work, romantic, external stresses of various kinds in the world, those habits that are unhealthy in particular are going to show up more so, and they're going to become more obvious, right? And the good habits are going to make life a little easier. So that shows up especially in leadership because you're not just dealing with yourself, you're dealing with others, and they are watching you. Some judgmentally, some hopeful, some looking for guidance, right? And we're not going to get in a whole topic of leadership concepts because that's a little bit out of my scope of just like the many modalities and ideas. But more importantly about yourself and what you bring to the table is if you are not willing to do the inner work, you will only go so far. Not only in life, but as a leader, you can only connect with a certain type of person. I love this example of like, applies in coaching, but also in general. Like if you become like a hammer stout coach and you're really direct and just like calling people out on their crap, which is important, you need to have that skill. It is good to do that. But if you become only good at that, it's like building a house with a hammer. You're going to break a lot of windows. It's not very effective, right? It only gets you so far. You become a one-trick pony for a very certain type of person versus like Batman having a utility belt that applies to many things. Who has the most influence in conversation? It's the one who's most flexible. Bruce Lee said it best. Be like water, my friends. Fluid. Don't break. That's different. Being flexible is not a doormat, which a lot of people think. It is the tree that bends that does not break versus the rigid one. Right. So keeping that in mind of being fluid and open-minded and growth mindset, which is another more buzzword that comes to mind. And I think it was a question about how does connection show up for men and women in leadership?
Yeah, and how does connection support leadership?
Absolutely. And so if you can't connect as a leader, you're not a leader. You're a manager. My personal opinion, right? Managers, this is an extreme, and we're kind of black and whiting these two things to be clear here. But a manager typically tells people what to do. A leader inspires and gets them to do other things, right? You've probably seen the meme. The manager is riding on the chariot, move forward, and the leader is in the front, right? It's kind of the extreme example. It is your responsibility as a leader to connect with the people under you or next to you and above you. Because when you can connect with them, you inspire on just many different levels, more levels than you can before. Again, this kind of like coaching, like it requires a certain level of vulnerability, but also a certain level of finesse and charisma. Let's talk about this concept, how men and women bring things differently. Vanessa Von Edwards, I love her work. If you're familiar with it, I highly recommend it. I'm going to go into detail about some of her topics because it relates to this. Women are stereotypically perceived. There's a concept called warmness and competency, kind of like an X and Y axis. So it's like warm and competent, just for those people watching. And in the middle is called charisma. And we'll get to that in a minute. And I'll explain that using her terminology because I think it's just beautiful. Stereotypically, women are perceived as more warm. Stereotypically, they are enculturated to do so. They do seek out more women's groups and connections. I don't know whether that's culturally added to or just enjoyable to do so. And men are stereotypically seen as more competent. Now, here's what's crazy. I'm not going to go into too many statistics, and they may have been a little updated since then, but if a woman wears a pair of glasses, they are seen as 17% more competent. Just because. Yes. And so for one of these reasons, some people wear glasses even if they don't need them, which I think is kind of silly, but that's a whole nother conversation entirely. So does that mean you're doomed? Oh no, women are always going to be warm. Well, in our society, at least in America, I can speak on the most, as women are seen as more nurturing. And we'll get into the topic later about why women have to balance that, like, I'm a boss bitch versus like being a warm nurturing thing, which is a dual dynamic men don't have to deal with as much. But we'll get into that in a minute. But how women and men kind of bring different things to the table of leadership is men are perceived as more competent. Now, what is the importance and why is this relevant? Well, outside of leadership, just in general, if you're perceived as too warm, what do you typically get labeled as? Extreme doormat. Just a doormat. You aren't taken seriously. And everybody likes you. Everybody will talk to you and communicate with you, which is important, right? The positive side of being on the warmer scale is you will get more promotions, more dates, you will get the job. You will. However, the flip side, being too competent, everybody knows you're in charge. They know you're the boss. But they will not go to you for help because they may not trust you. And they're afraid of you. Not always afraid, but just, I hesitate to use the word respect, but if you have a healthy balance of two, respect is there. But you may not know what's going on. So if you lead with the extreme case, leading with an iron fist, like, you're never going to get a pulse of what's going on ever. And that was the norm 20, 30 years ago in corporate American societies and leadership. You were seen, if you didn't roll with an iron fist, you were seen as weak, which is, in my opinion, a very outdated concept and very weighted leadership. Again, it's kind of management style. So mixing the two. There are a lot of ways you can do this, and it typically doesn't take very much. And also, what does a person look like when they're too warm, like extreme? Hi, oh my gosh, it's so good to see you. Hi, oh, I missed you so much. Like, get away from me. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of too warm, even though they might be confident and competent, they might present as insecure. We know people like this. Right? And they may be amazing what they do. They just present differently versus some people actually do have insecurities kind of thing. So presentation is everything. But there are simple things you can do with body language, right? Smiling is one, but that's not always true kind of thing. You can turn your head, which means I'm curious. Kind of like how dogs do this. What? It's kind of a warm cue. And one other thing I'll share before we bounce it back to you is a competent cue is called the steeple. I love this one. She talked about this. This is perceived as power. Don't do this. That's evil. Don't do the fingers. Don't tap. Don't tap. That's a very different message. That is evil. You'll see it's a little crazy. Hold them. Why is this? Because when we love hands, we feel safe seeing palms. It is a friendly, warm cue. It's saying, hi, friend. Hello. Nice to see you. I have nothing to hide. When you're at a meeting and you have your hands on the table, stop that. Don't do that. You're making people nervous psychologically, or they're behind your hands.
Really?
Absolutely don't do that. You're making people nervous and they don't know it, but psychologically they are. Keep your hands on the table. The other thing that decides if they're competent versus confident is the distance between your ears to your shoulders. Notice mine are down. Watch this.
Mm-hmm.
Do I
Mm-hmm.
look confident to you? Am I so confident right now? No, I look anxious as heck, even though I might not be. But as a result, you can't see my hands right now, but they will naturally do this. You take up less space. And what happens psychologically is that when you take up less space, your body follows not only your vocal presentation, but your visual presentation. You will speak softer. Or just taking more space, right? It's actually why a lot of women are trained to take up less space. A lot of ways. Be small, be unimportant, which is kind of a cultural thing, unfortunately. And men are kind of trained to take up more space in some ways. Does that make sense? Kind of like the power,
Patriarchy.
pretty much. And so, like, like that's why they talk about the power pose. It's a great TED talk on it, like the Wonder Woman Superman pose, which reduces cortisol and things like that. That's the whole thing. But yeah, that's what comes to mind. Hope we're still on topic. Just want to bounce it back to you.
I want to rewind a second. Did you say hands on the desk?
Preferably.
On the desk.
Or
So they're
at
going on the
least
desk.
at least in scene. They need to be seen.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
It doesn't have to be on the desk. This is another important thing why I want to mention the shoulders. If you have a desk and it makes you do this, do not do that.
Okay. Like, oh, I gotta shift everything.
Right? It's just remember the distance between the shoulders and the ears. So if they're on the desk and it makes you do this, go ahead and put them down. But like hiding them under the table or hiding them makes people nervous. Right? So you always want to have your hands out by your side, or like you can just do this. Rest them. The steeple, it's a great one. I love it. She recently did a podcast and talked all about this. It's a super good one. We can link it in the description if they want to know much, much more information on it.
Yeah, I do. I do. So send me that link and I will link it in the show because
Absolutely.
and it does. You don't realize how much
No, you
like your
don't.
body and all of like everything makes all the difference. All right, you
Absolutely.
did bounce it back to me. I want to shift gears a little because I know the topic is connection.
Yes.
You mentioned jumping into coaching during the pandemic. We can't talk about connection if we don't talk about loneliness. Loneliness is maybe the complete opposite of connection. Um, I'm not sure how you define it as a coach. There's probably a very specific definition. But looking at loneliness and how men and women approach loneliness, maybe you have case studies or examples from the pandemic. I feel like even as a woman, I was less connected, but I was probably more connected to people than my husband. So there is the layer of connection for how men and women approach connection as it relates to loneliness and also anything about the pandemic.
Absolutely. So the pandemic was very difficult for a lot of people. Identify as more of an, I don't know if identify is the right word to be honest, but like I'm wired to be more of a extrovert. And just we're on the same page for those listeners is what's the difference? No, it's not just that I'm more gregarious and outgoing. Although that is true, an extrovert, I love this example of like I start with an empty battery and it needs to be charged. Not every day, but just I need that like social interaction. How that shows up for me is a quality conversation, being around people, if you will, preferably people I like, right? Versus an introvert is not, so they could be outgoing and gregarious as well, but their battery is full and it drains down faster. They need more time to recover. So I just want to make sure we're on the same page about this. And so I was just like, oh no, I might struggle because I'm an extrovert. Not so. I actually thrived mostly because of my habits and sleep schedule, which is the big thing. I wasn't going anywhere, and so I was a little younger and just moved out before I moved after college. I went back to my mom's house to save some money, and it was did wonders for my dating life. Not really, that's sarcasm. And I moved in my first apartment complex by myself, and I was like, yeah, I got my own bachelor pad. And then the pandemic happened, but there wasn't any social outings. Like bars weren't open, so I wasn't missing out on anything. So I didn't go crazy like I thought I might. I also cultivated co-working connections and had like video game nights. I started playing Dungeons and Dragons with some college buddies. So I had that connection piece there, even though it wasn't in person and I missed it and wanted it type of thing. Aside from the extroverted versus introverted thing and connection pieces, a lot of people didn't do well. They didn't have the skills, or excuse me, that's not even the appropriate word. They didn't have the awareness of the opportunities that they could connect with others. So exacerbated existing problems that may have not been present to them in a lot of ways. So some people didn't know about the idea of Eventbrite, Meetup.com, Facebook events, and there were less online ones as it grew. And so evolving into this concept of loneliness, I don't think this was born out of this. I think this has been generally happening. It started in millennials. Millennials are one of the loneliest generations out there. Gen Z are even worse, specifically in dating. They just are. And there's still new research coming out about this. So I'm not going to speak like as if this is the factual black and white truth, but like because of phones and social media, I'll quote again Vanessa Von Numbers. I love what she said because she's been doing research on this for like 17, 18 years. And a question was asked her, like, what do you think is adding to the loneliness epidemic? And I love what she said. It was just like the AirPods, putting your AirPods in and walking through the city. And as she gave a great example about when I don't know how many years ago, but 20, 30 years ago, if you go to the gym, you're crazy if you have your Walkman in. Like people would have these type of connections there, right? And now you're crazy if you don't have headphones on. You're the weirdo. Like, what's this guy doing? They want to talk to me? Get away here, right? So I love her example of this because it encapsulates a specific point about micro connections. This is in person that you kind of miss out on to a certain degree. To be clear, I'm not in favor of everybody going back to the 5-day work week. I think that's terrible, but that's a whole nother conversation. But micro connections were typically like, using the gym example, let's say you saw someone at the gym and then you see them at the coffee shop and in passing, you're like, hey, I've seen you at that gym. Was that you? Am I mistaken? Like, oh yeah, I go to that gym. Like, oh yeah, well, what are you doing this weekend? Bam. You've instantly started a potential connection that moves from you see this person to an acquaintance to then potential maybe friend. And then it could level up after that. Now, some people do prefer online connections. I don't. I'd rather at least talk to you on video or at least on the phone. But typing away, I don't know. I guess it's just never been my jam. And I find it more difficult to do that kind of thing. So, one more thing I want to mention on this loneliness thing and how does it differ? And at the same time, how is it similar to show up in men and women? I was listening to this other great podcast, Healthy Gamers, the guy. I just like some of his content, super good. And he was talking about how his community became very toxic for various reasons. He didn't go into detail why. But the moderators, in order to challenge this, came up with an interesting rule. And the rule was you cannot say blanket statements. Blanket statement says, all men are like this, all women are like this. You could only replace it as my experiences. Why? Because that typically, humanizes you and be like, well, my experience is this. And there was a great example that I wanted to share that talked about this person who is kind of, it was a self-identified incel, black cell, part of a community who, what's a whole other conversation we get into, but they're like, I've been on 3 or 4 dates with girls and none of them like me. And so what they typically say, like, well, all women are like this. And he says, well, my experience is nobody wants to date me and I'm really lonely. Vice versa. In the similar thread, this woman said, I'm a fairly attractive woman. And not always, but I can typically sleep with anyone I want. And I have never been more lonely. What an interesting comparison. Not comparison, but connection those two form teams. They both have similar, different challenges, but experience the same loneliness. So when you say, do they experience it differently? I think the emotion is the same, but I think it can show up differently. Right? So I crave more deep quality connections. Some people just want more friends because they want something to do. that's still lonely, lack of connection, but it might show up differently. It's different flavors, if you will. So yes, it does show up differently in men and women, but I think like kind of differently in what people want and what they value in all people. Does that make sense? Yeah, that's what comes to mind.
I have so many thoughts and I want to go so many places. What I heard there a little bit before you dove into that story about the man and the woman and their experience differently, I heard that there's going to be a very big need for coaching on how to actually connect, because you gave out that little hack about the gym, and I was like, oh, that's brilliant. We are going to dive into community in a couple episodes later. I think in April or May. Now I can't remember.
Yes.
We're going to dive into a community conversation. And she gave me research before our recording to watch a show called Bowling Alone, or no.
Interesting.
The guy wrote the book Bowling Alone, and now I can't remember the name of the
Never
documentary.
eat
Anyway,
lunch alone.
it was a talk about social capital and how social capital is going away because of technology, and it literally studies the technology. And you mentioned the whole earpods, but even more the phone, I would say.
Absolutely. And I want to add one more thing to this to
Yeah.
round it out a little bit is a lot of people think, and this is more true today than it was 20 years ago, but I believe the statement was still true 20 years ago in a lot of ways. If you go through a period in your life where like, oh, I just got to only focus on work, and then you just kind of not hang out with people, or some people get married and then they have a kid and they just kind of can't hang out with many people anymore, or then all of a sudden become single. And you're like, oh, a lot of people believe, and my experience has been more young people, I think, because the gaming culture of like, oh, I suck at social skills. I suck at connecting. I need to level up my skills before I get out and do that. That is not true. That is a lie. Children go out of their way and talk to people, and they are bad at it. They're bad at it because they're kids. They're bad at everything, right? They are, but they get out there and do it because there's a natural urge to want to. Well, most kids, not all. Let's not put blanket statements here. They have this natural
We
urge
just
to get
covered
out
that.
there. Right. And so they want to go out there and connect with people. And then what do? They get better at it. Social engagements, when you are out of social environments, you don't lose the ability. They may atrophy, but it's like a mental muscle. It can be strengthened. It's not that some people might have more talent, just like in a lot of things. They might be whether nature or nurture doesn't matter, but it's still a skill to work at. It is your responsibility not to level it up before you go out there and do it, but withstand the social awkwardness. And a lot of people, which has been a big American culture of like, oh, take this pill, the magic goes away. Like quick fixes, dopamine highs, essentially, especially with social media. I don't like pain on our way. I love that expression of like, if you want a hard life, do easy things. If you want an easier life, do hard things. That doesn't apply to everything, but it applies to this situation of like getting outside your comfort zone and withstanding going to a meet. I remember going to a meetup a couple months ago. It was awkward as hell. I'm pretty good at social skills. I'm pretty good at those kind of things. I'm like, I'm nervous, which is normal. But then what happened is I started talking to someone, like usually it's the host, not always, but I'm like, oh, hey, how you doing? You're connecting. And then you're fine. It usually starts to mellow out, especially by the second person you talk to. And then you see the new person, they're like a deer in headlights, just like you were. Like, and then you're in a position of, I don't know, power is the right word, but you're in a position of comfortability. And like, come over here, join us. Let me ease your anxiety burden. And you welcome them. That feels good, right? So yeah, I just want to add that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That you have been so insightful on all of like even body language and
Yes.
hacks to connect. Do you have anything else about? Well, you know what? I'm going to ask you for 3 hacks at the end anyway, so we will get to that. I feel like we've gone really off topic, and I don't even know where I was going to go.
Yes.
I mean, let's circle back to the men versus women connection.
Sure. Absolutely.
I had um I had talked to you about a couple of questions I might ask. And I
Yes.
did really love some pushback you gave on one of the questions. So I still want to ask it and get the pushback and get your view because I think it's important and I think it begs some questions and it might even continue the conversation in that direction. So my question had been about connection being power and what women could steal, and I did use the word steal, women could steal from men and what men could steal from women to advance their connection skills. And
Yes.
you had said,
I said I didn't like that wording specifically. I didn't like the word steal in particular that came to mind because and I think it's the word power and steal in the same sentence because it feels like power dynamics, which is essentially pushing the agenda of patriarchy, which is a power dynamic, and that men are better inherently, while the adjectives that are escaping me right now than women in a lot of ways. And so rather than steal, I would say the word cultivate comes to mind. I don't know if that's the appropriate. We're in the situation. Yeah. Yeah. Cultivate essentially like realizing like, hey, I've got some skills that I might be naturally and or more trained and experienced at that you are. Let's collaborate and connect. So rather than I love, my first psychology class in college, Psych 101, my professor who was teaching for 50 years always said, everybody likes to focus on the difference between men and women, but actually there's more similarities than there ever are differences. Maybe not culturally, but psychologically, there are. One of the things that I would say that women could cultivate more from men is replacing your sorries with thank yous. Typically, women are trained to be like, oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. Get a compliment on the dress. Oh, this old thing? I degrade myself. Oh, I got it this. Oh, it was cheap. Oh, it was discounted. No, 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 no. You're degrading your worth and value. Whereas most men, not always, are just like, thank you. As is, right? Vice versa, the thing that men can cultivate and learn from is that we've talked about kind of where deals and things and men business. It's more transactional and relationship kind of thing. But outside the boardroom, the golf clubs and the cigar lounge, things like that, which is where more connection is formed. But typically, some people men only do that with business, or women do it more holistically, socially, family, connecting, expressing how they feel, expressing their worries and doubts, being vulnerable. Women, there is life, not in the work world. Women are less vilified for opening their vulnerability up in more spaces. And men, there are very far and few between spaces where vulnerability is accepted, which is a outdated way of thinking and moving through the world, as most younger generations are adopting, millennials and Gen Z, absolutely. I think millennials was the first being like, of course I have a therapist. And Gen Z was like, everybody has a therapist. Kind of thing. Like, it's fine. It's normalized in a lot of ways. Connecting more, I would say, to summarize, men connecting and talking about more different areas of life and seeking out those connections versus trying to do the lone wolf, which is a more patriarchy tendency, which just burns them out and kills them faster. Right? There are many more I could share, but those are the two that really come to mind about that. That
I
makes
love
sense.
it. I love all of that. We are getting close to the wrap up time. And I feel like you have given so many hacks. They were like hidden hacks in
Yes.
there for connection and even all the different types of connection. Just you said something in that last segment, and in that last answer, and I don't recall it at this moment, but I am going to highlight it when I go back and market these things because it was brilliant. But you've given us all of these hacks. I like to wrap the show up with 3 hacks on the topic. So, what are your top 3 hacks for our listeners on connection? Ideally, it'd be making connection or deepening connection.
Yes, and I have some of these. And one of them I'll steal from the podcast episode because it's just such gold. I'll share that one first. I love what she says when they talk about there's 3 types of relationships. There are many more, but just go with this example. Level 1 is this is past acquaintance. They know who you are, they know what you do. Yeah, maybe acquaintance, maybe a little friend, occasional friend, whatever. Level 2 is they know what your goals are. You know someone's in that category when you probably like to hang out with them and they know what you're working on. And level 3, which is one of her latest books that's coming out, I'm very excited to read, is somebody knows the story you tell yourself, how you see yourself. And I'll speak more about those. This is one hack, by the way. I'll do the other 2. Is when you move from level 1 to level 2, typically you ask them, like, what are you working on? What are your goals? What are you excited about? By the way, never ask somebody what you do. That's one hack. If you could, one thing if you remember from this, never ask someone, what do you do? Remove that from your vocabulary because they go on autopilot and just phase out. I like to say, what do you like to do with your time? Or what are you excited about? That's one hack. Because it gives them options. And if they start talking about what they're excited about, they're going to light up. And if their work, what you do is typically, if most people aren't always defined by their work. And if you say, what do you do? They hate their job, some people. And they're like, right. They're boring. Then you don't want to talk to them anymore. You don't. And that's not fair to them because they're probably really, they could be awesome to talk about. You don't know about. So one hack is like, remove what do you do from your vocabulary. Ask more interesting questions that you care about. Going back to my example of level 1, level 2, and level 3, I really like this one. How do you go from level 2 connection to level 3? Don't do this with everybody. This is not a question you're going to ask a stranger at a networking event, to be clear, because you might not be ready for the answer. And the question you ask them is, what TV or movie actor do you most identify with your life right now? Not who your favorite is. Who do you think is like their story is? That's my life. You will be surprised at what answers you get. And you have immediately deepened the connection, right? Those are 2 hacks.
Wait, before you go into the third one, who was the author again?
Vanessa Von Edwards. This was in the show notes. She talks about this more in depth in the podcast that we'll share, but I really like it and I think it's important to hear. The third one is a step back. Be kind to yourself. Kinder than you are normally. Why? We are really hard on ourselves when it comes to these kind of things. Things I always tell my clients is little hinges swing big doors. It's not always about taking the massive action. I know Tony Robbins says it all the time. I agree when you're ready. You have to take leaps sometimes, take the big change. There's no way around it, but you don't have to do that every time. You can actually re-traumatize yourself if you do if I ever come to my clients and we have a breakthrough session, every single conversation, you might start getting afraid to talk to me. Right? You can only handle and process so much work at once. Little hinges swing big doors, and you don't have to do it alone. Only you can do the thing, but you don't have to do it alone. It's okay to ask for help. It's like a bunch of hacks wrapped into one, but that's my last one. I'll share.
I loved it all. There was so much to take from this episode. So, Joey, those tuning in who are tuning in and want to reach out, want to learn more, want to connect, how do they do that?
The best way is to go to my website, growourlight.com. That's also my email, growourlight.com. Shoot me an email, which is on the website. So go on the website, check me out.
Yes, I'm going to put that all in the show notes. Joey, thank you so much for taking your time to speak with me today and to share how to deepen connection, make connection, all the things related to connection.
Thank you for having me. It's been a joy.
Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to today's episode. For all the juicy deets on this episode, be sure to check out our show notes or give us a holler on Instagram at Hacking the Patriarchy Podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support this podcast, don't be shy. Please share it with your friends. Sharing is caring after all. Lastly, if you'd like to lend your personal support, please take a moment to tell the world about it with a review on your favorite streaming platform. We'd be forever grateful. Tune in again soon to enjoy a brand new episode of the Hacking the Patriarchy podcast. And until next time, keep on hacking, my friends.